Okay, good evening and welcome everyone. We're so glad you could join us tonight for a very special evening celebrating Paul Engle, Iowa's Poet of the Century, longtime director of the Writers' Workshop, co-founder of the International Writing Program, and one of the most influential literary voices of the 20th century. This Thursday is the 17th anniversary of our community's designation as a UNESCO City of Literature. We've navigated shifts in the U.S. relationship with UNESCO, and there may be more to come, but two things remain constant. First, our designation itself. We are here, and we aren't going anywhere. Second, our commitment to our mission, to build and support diverse communities of writers and audiences through the transformative power of story. Sometimes our role is to give someone space to tell their story. Other times we help them discover how to tell it. And often, we're the ones sharing the stories that shape this place. Paul Engle's own story is one we return to again and again. Born in Cedar Rapids in 1908, he attended Coe College in the University of Iowa, where he became one of the first students to earn a graduate degree based on creative work. His talent was undeniable. His debut collection, Worn Earth, won the Yale Series of Younger Poets, and his second book, American Song, landed him on the cover of the New York Times Book Review as a new voice in American poetry. After studying as a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford, Engle returned to Iowa and helped guide the Writers' Workshop into the nation's leading graduate writing program. Later, with his wife, Walling Engle, he co-founded the International Writing Program, creating global connections so profound that the pair received a Nobel Peace Prize nomination in 1976. Engle died at the age of 82, having published 14 books of poetry, a novel, a memoir, and an opera libretto. His literary legacy lives on in the lives and works of those authors he supported and inspired. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by two people who have lived that history in a very personal way. Mary Burge, Paul Engle's daughter, grew up during the early years of the workshop and brings with her a treasure trove of photos and memories. And her partner with her is Will Boutelle, the boy next door from Engle's American Child Stories. We're also thrilled to welcome Reed Hagen, winner of the 2025 Paul Engle Glory of the Senses High School Essay Contest. This contest, created by the Iowa City of Literature, encourages students to capture a vivid Iowa experience in writing, continuing Paul Engle's legacy of inspiring young voices. Before we turn things over to Mary and Will, we've asked Reed to share his winning piece, Taste of July, with us tonight. And to give him a proper introduction, please join me in welcoming West High Principal Mitch Gross.
Good evening. My name is Mitch Gross, and I have the honor of being Reed's principal at West High School and also serving as a board member of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. I will say I was not on the board when Reed was selected as winner, so there's no conflict of interest from that standpoint. But nonetheless, it is my pleasure to introduce this remarkable young writer and thinker whose curiosity about the world seems endless. Reed's interests range from primate behavior to the works of Kafka, Eliot, and Bradbury. His appreciation of Kafka is especially fitting, as Reed also has a deep passion for entomology, a passion that appears vividly in the essay you're going to hear, as he describes, quote, the high-pitched vibration of gnats and June bugs drifting toward the light. And the essay is going to open with a striking line, quote, the corn sweat out in the country was starting, a sentence that immediately places the reader in the thick human breath of an Iowa summer. Reed writes with an extraordinary sensory awareness. He enables the reader to feel the air, to see the landscape, to even taste and smell the world he depicts. That ability to awaken all the senses is what makes Reed and his work so exceptional. And it's no surprise that his essay earned the top prize in the Paul Engle Day Glory of the Senses Essay Contest. Reed embodies the very best of West High School, a place where excellence is a tradition. And today we see that tradition carried forward in his voice, his imagination, and this achievement. Please join me in congratulating Reed and welcoming him to the podium, as where we are in for a genuine treat to have Reed read his award-winning essay, Taste of July. Reed, come on up. Congratulations.
All right. The snowless melancholy of March came silently and calmly. April rolled, May sang in the halls of wildflower meadows. June hummed, both with the high-pitched vibrations of gnats making loop-de-loops around the ear, and with the whir of June bugs lazily hovering towards the street lights and illuminated windows. Now it was July, and the corn sweat out in the country was starting. The cornfields, now well taller than me, seemed to be releasing water vapor into the air like a boiling pot of water. The humidity, amplified by the corn sweat, was the most intense I'd ever felt. My skin was damp, not from sweat but from condensation. My wet skin tugged against my clothes, creating uncomfortable friction. However, I tried to give my damp skin no attention. I had a task to do. Miller's Pond, an average farm pond a bit west of Des Moines. It was owned by a friend of my grandfather, and I had been fishing there ever since I was a toddler. Now I was 10, enjoying my summer, unaware that in approximately 9 months, the Ides of March would unleash COVID upon me, changing my life forever. The pond was about 4 acres in size, bordered by cattails and populated with thousands of bluegill, as well as a few bass and catfish. It was these inhabitants whom I was after. My grandfather had promised my cousins and me that for dinner we would eat whatever fish we caught. All my other cousins had caught a fish, and to be the only one who hadn't would be a huge blow to my young ego. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to lower. The light made the water glimmer with a blinding intensity. I saw peculiar things when I stared out at the glittering water. The sparkle of the shining pond seemed to float into the sky after a few seconds of staring at it. The sparkling water then began to bend in the sky in ways of utter impossibility. A large boulder sticking out of the water a few feet from me seemed to hover into the skyway, quivering and shaking as it went before being picked apart and disappearing from vision. The boulder was then followed by the trees on the other end of the pond, outlines of themselves rising above their canopy like the soul of a dead man floating away from his body. The trees' outlines bent around each other in an odd motion, moving like an implausible jellyfish, the blue of the sky being their ocean. When they then slowly faded from vision, I rubbed my eyes. Mirages were the strangest. The wind picked up. Deep breaths of air opened cottonwood seed pods, and the thin, white, fluffy fibers floated through the air like a summer snow. They glided into the water, where they accumulated on the shimmering surface. The sun was growing lower. I had to catch a fish now or accept my inferiority. I tried to remember all the tips and quips that my grandfather had given over the years. I recalled him saying a few years ago, "On hot summer days, the fish get too hot, and they either find shade or swim to the bottom." Quickly, I looked around the pond, and I spotted an old, decaying deck that went out about 20 feet into the pond. I ran over to the deck and got down on my hands and knees. The rough wood of the deck dug into my skin, its texture being one that I did not enjoy. I looked down into the green water, and through the glare, I could make out the shape of bluegill, lazily swimming in circles. I quickly cast a hook with a worm poorly wrapped on it, expecting an eager response. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. I reeled the line back, stumped. The wind was still roaring. Harsh July gales created waves in the prairies, stirring up beetles, grasshoppers, and other odd insects. The wind awoke the barn swallows, whose muddy clay-like nests were situated on a nearby shed. The swallows twisted and turned in the air, circling each other as if in a chaotic dance. They swooped down near the tall grass, eating bugs straight from the air. The gales kept roaring, swaying the grass and nearby cottonwood canopies. The sound of twigs rustling, grass stems bristling against each other, and small waves in the pond licking the shore had a certain cadence to it, like a breath. The land was breathing. Between 2 large posts, an orb-weaving spider of some sort had constructed a large web. The web swayed in the wind, catching several of the disturbed insects. It swayed with a certain cadence. Was the web breathing? Near the dock was an old flagpole, the flag long having since been lost. It was covered in lichens, blue and orange splotches of life, The wire at the top swayed in the wind, making a tattletale sound as the sun edged closer to the horizon. All these tiny sounds, which I usually would barely notice, were combining and interlocking, creating a symphony, the wind being the eternal conductor. The natural instruments were not breathing, they were singing, and in this song there was a faint whisper, a whisper I couldn't quite comprehend. And every time I tried to grasp onto it, like a fish, it flapped and jerked, making me lose grip. Fish. I needed fish. It was then I remembered another thing my grandfather had told me. The key to most problems oftentimes lies invisible, right in front of your pupils. I looked back towards the barn swallows again, as they feasted on the insects disturbed by the gales. Then I looked down at the spider web, as the arachnid feasted on the insects disturbed by the gales. And then a rush of realization hit me like a river overflowing its banks. I ran over to the prairie's edge and pushed open the tall stems of grass. After a few seconds of searching, I found a small grasshopper. I grabbed it with my thumb and pointer finger. Between my two fingers, it kicked and struggled before releasing out of its mouth a copper-colored vomit which stained my palm. The secretion made my skin feel tingly, as if I was being gently pricked with a needle, as if several mosquitoes had landed on my palm and were now driving their spear-shaped mouths into me. The secretion smelled of decay and tobacco, imprisoning my nose and brain for a few intense seconds, and then the gales blew the smell away, and my mind became my own again. I ran back to the dock and pulled the worm off my hook. The worm smelled of earth and thunderstorms, and I needed to take a few seconds for the gales to blow the scent away again. After recovering, I fixed the grasshopper onto the hook and cast it under the deck. As I did so, I noticed the multitudes of crickets, mayflies, and grasshoppers which had been blown into the pond. Smaller insects, such as ants, attempted to use the larger insect's corpse as a raft to escape the pond's reach. My hook sank slowly into the water, and after not even 5 seconds, I had a bite. Anyone who's ever been fishing can tell you that bluegill fight like a fish 3 times their size. It took me about 30 seconds to land the creature. As I fought it, the handle on my small pole dug into my arms, leaving a bright red imprint. At last, however, I got it onto the dock, my hands tingling as I did so. The bluegill was a female, as evident by the subdued colors. However, in the dying sunlight, she glistened like a diamond. That night, my grandfather filleted the fish, using an oddly curved knife to separate skin from body and then muscle from bone. Flies swarmed the pile of fish guts discarded nearby, making it look like a pile of coals. My grandmother then cooked the fish fillets on the stove with a little bit of salt, butter, and pepper. When dinner was finally ready, I eagerly grabbed a chunk of meat from the fish I'd caught. It was hot, greasy, and slippery in my hands, disintegrating across my palm as I squeezed it. I eagerly put the meat into my mouth and tasted of milky butter, overbearing salt, and intense pepper. But more than that, it tasted like glittering waters, open prairies, and the conductor of wind. But even more than that, it tasted of independence and of success. All right.
That was wonderful.
Thank you, Reed. That was great. So now I'm going to turn things over to Mary and Will. I had the opportunity to first meet Mary and Will last year when they came to town for the Paul Engle Award ceremony. And it's just been an honor to meet them and learn their stories, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. So,
Thank you, Rachel. You were certainly one of the big, am I near this thing? No? No? Yes? It's a,
Pardon me.
fix it and I won't touch it.
Perfect.
Okay, good.
Me too.
You're good.
Yeah, you're taller. Well, Reed is a very hard act to follow, very. But, and I am not a writer, but it seems so appropriate to start talking with the future the present and the future, and then loop back to the past. And I'm grateful to many people who I met in Iowa City last year, because I hadn't lived here in years and years, and I'm going to acknowledge them as I go along, but especially Rachel, who has become a very good friend, and we write back and forth about all kinds of things all the time. Okay. So in 1941, my father became the director of the Iowa Writers' Workshop. Before that, it had been sort of a get-together in a library in someone's house, and people read their stories and ate cookies. But he became the director in a very different way. And I myself, in 1941, was a year old. And so I was exploring the world, learning what was right and what was wrong, and especially what I could get away with in that photo, which was our family's Christmas card. Let's see, is that the... My father grew up in Cedar Rapids, and his father had Engle's Riding Academy. His father broke horses. In Iowa, you know what to break a horse means. In California, nobody does. But he trained 3 and 5 gaited riding horses. And from the stories my father and mother told me, he treated his children the same way, as very strong-willed young people whose wills needed to be broke. And he was apparently not a warm person toward his children. He always served himself first at the table, and his wife, Evelyn, worked so hard at home that she, with her 4 children and housework and cooking and scrubbing and washing, that she never needed to cut or file her fingernails, which is a good description of my grandparents. My father was exactly the opposite as a father to my sister and me. And because we have Reed here, I decided to put in some pictures of my father in high school. And he had that very slick down hair, which Will's mother described as shoe polish hair when her about-to-be husband had it. And in the other picture, my teenage father is with his younger sister, Catherine, and those badges on his lapel are Sunday school badges from the Methodist Church. And he earned so many of those Sunday school badges that he was designated a mother's little jewel, which was a very high honor. And at one time in his life, he decided he wanted to be a Methodist minister. He preached one sermon in Stumptown, Iowa, and decided that he really did not have the calling. But he always wrote. So this is my mother, a little bit about her. Her father had Nissan's department store in Blairstown, Iowa, and for the opening of the department store, for the opening day, the grand opening, he had put out flyers saying, free root beer and free donuts, all you can eat. And he attracted a big crowd with that. However, when the doors opened, people realized that the root beer had been poured into bedpans, those awful steel things they would put under you when you were in the hospital and you couldn't get up and go to the bathroom. And the donuts had been broken up into the root beer. And therefore, he hardly lost anything from his advertising. He later went into real estate, and I'm going to talk about what he bought and sold. And the other picture is my mother looking so cute, and an identical looking doll. Anyway, that's my mother, Mary Nissen. My parents met in high school, Washington High School in Cedar Rapids, and they seemed to fall in love immediately. They were together as much as they could. For privacy, for finding some quiet time away from other people, they went to the Cedar River, and they did a lot of swimming. These are, again, pictures from high school age, swimming and canoeing and probably other activities on the banks, given that there are a lot of my mother's clothes strewn around, and she appears to be covering herself up. The picture where my father's sitting in a little wooden hut he had constructed, trying to look very cool, smoking a pipe, which is what you did in those days. He was an off and on pipe smoker, but never a real one. And the middle picture is my two parents sitting on the fence rail at his father's riding stable. But they were inseparable. They got married in England in 1936, I think. I'm not good at numbers, memories and people and what they were wearing and all that, but I wanted to have Will read a poem that is from American Song that my father wrote about my mother before he left to become a Rhodes Scholar in England.
Mary, published in 1935. You said I would forget you, forget your lithe body thrusting the night black water, lifted on the long swell of the current, the strong feet beating. Forget you, brown as the granite crumbled beach, running on the wave-hard sand. Forget the wave downriver with our paddles flinging wild and flashing moonlight. You were wrong, for always now I see you, always swimming with body supple as a diving otter's, churning a wake of pale foam in the torn and tideless estuaries of my mind, where the shy fish of memory leap and shatter the quiet water, their dark scales gleaming.
Oh, you read really well.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other photo is of my parents on their honeymoon, and I picked that one because of the discrepancy in their attire. My mother is wearing sort of a German dirndl, and my father a bathing suit. They spent their honeymoon in Germany and Finland and Russia. They traveled a lot, and I have a sort of locket that my mother had bought in Finland long before she had children, but she'd bought it on their honeymoon. Aside from my mother, the most influential person in my father's life was Miss Elizabeth Cock, and she is the third person on the left and the very farthest one on the right. And she was his high school English teacher, and she encouraged him to write. And he started writing poetry in high school. and she recognized his talent and talked to him about how he should go to college, he should go to Co. And he said, my family values hard work, they do not value education, and there's no money. He had always worked the jobs that a kid could work, delivering newspapers and working in a drugstore, selling magazines, but there was no money for college. There was nothing like that. And Miss Cox said, Paul, I want you to go to Co and apply and talk to them about a scholarship. He said, okay, so he went, and when he talked with someone in administration, they said, you have been awarded a full scholarship for 4 years by an anonymous donor. This makes me cry, I'm sorry. And when Miss Cox was tragically hit by a taxi and killed, he was just about to graduate, but it was in all the newspapers, and Co told him that she had been the anonymous donor, and that whenever she got paid, she was a school teacher, she would bring in the tuition money in $10 bills and pay for his tuition. Otherwise, I don't know that he would have gone to college. I'm not sure. And Rachel, who can do anything, managed to find these old pictures. Once I remembered Miss Cox's name, and it does make me cry. It's such an incredible story that might not have happened. And after that, he earned all kinds of scholarships for Columbia and Rhodes Scholarship. So I was called Munchie. I was named for my mother, Mary, but I was always called Munchie because out of the Wizard of Oz, the Munchkins, my mother said when I was born, oh my goodness, we got a Munchkin. Anyway, so I was called that. And as far as I can tell, my parents seemed really happy to have me, and I was very lucky to have them. I had a really marvelous family life, and it seemed very child-centered. My father was, well, both of my parents were extraordinary in bringing me up, and I was very lucky in that. We lived at 1218 Friendly Avenue in Iowa City. It was one of a number of Moffett houses that were built by Howard Moffett, who was neither an architect nor an engineer, but he was a builder. And he got ideas out of magazines like Good Housekeeping. And he built these sort of unusual houses that all had many levels and many quirks. This was a relatively small house, but accommodated many people. It had a number of oddities, such as the dining room. The wall and the floor did not come together exactly. There was a gap, and so grass grew in between the wall and the floor, only in summer, but there was this gap, and we never used the dining room for eating. We ate in the kitchen, but the dining room had a hardwood floor, and we used it for a dance floor because we had all these writers coming over all the time, and so it was a dance floor. And I would sprinkle out of a box this stuff that looked like ivory snow and was called stardust to make the floor slippery. It had 2 bedrooms on the second floor, and then it had a third floor that had a very nice private bedroom. Everybody used the same bathroom on the second floor, but the third floor was where various writers lived. And the first one was Catherine Shattuck, who wrote a book in, I think, published a book in 1959 or so, called The Narrowest Circle. And I found, to my great pleasure, that writers' library in the Coralville Hyatt, where we are staying, that has 800 books by people connected to writing in Iowa City, does not have a copy of her book. I was very pleased to see that because it is a terrible book. And even the people who are in it, such as myself and Will, nobody can get through it. And Will was described, the names were just barely changed. Everyone in the book was completely identifiable. And as far as I know, it's the only book written sort of identifiably about my parents and me. And Will was described as semi-retarded and sort of funny-looking, and would be unlikely to ever learn to read. Well, I think he's pretty good looking. He got over being funny looking, I guess. No, I know what you looked like when you were 3, so you were always good looking. And he learned to read well enough to get through medical school, and even this day, he reads big, fat books like this. Not just chapter books, but big, fat books. He's a great reader. So Catherine Shattuck, well, it reminds me of something Mark Twain said. He hated the books of Jane Austen, and he said that any library that does not contain the books of Jane Austen may be considered excellent, even if it does not have a single book in it. Anyway, I would use that to describe this book by Catherine Shattuck. And Will's mother's in it, and his aunt, and his cousin, and our neighbors, and our friends, our family doctor. Everybody is very easily identified, but none of us has ever read it through. We think, oh, let's see what she says about this. But anyway, she was the first writer who lived there. And later, a year or two later, Oakley Hall and his wife Barbara lived there. And Oakley had just gotten out of the Marines and really wanted to write. And he wanted to write Westerns, and did so very successfully in that he sold them to Hollywood. And so he made a lot of money, and they were made into movies. And I was so happy to have Oakley and Barbara Hall there, because Barbara taught me to cook. My mother did not like to cook. She did, but she cooked, but enough so we were fed, but she did not like to cook. But Barbara loved to cook. And so I learned everything from her, and that was delightful. And then we had Joe Langland, who's a poet, I think ended up in Minnesota, not sure, and his wife Judy. And Joe was also right out of the military and was a great photographer, and so we ended up with a whole lot of wonderful photos that he took. Anyway, we had hot and cold running writers in that house, from the residents upstairs who also would go to Stone City, where we spent summers with us, and all the writers who were being entertained or entertaining us. And the house was perfect for that because I could sit in my nightgown at the top of the stairs and look down at the party, at the people dancing, and my father would project roses on the wall, and it would all be very dark, and oh, it was so romantic. And the best evening, though, that I remember was when Will's father, who had been a surgeon in the Navy, and so he was in the South Pacific when his mother was staying in Iowa City, and when he came back, his name was Boutelle, and Will's parents were very tall and very good looking, and they danced to Just My Bill, and oh, I thought that was so glamorous. Wow. With this arrangement of the house where it was full of people, my father needed a place to write that was quiet, and during the war, the Second World War, you were not allowed to build a dwelling building, but you could build a farm building. So he ordered a hog house with a high door and windows, I guess a custom hog house, and in it he built a desk out of plywood that went around 3/4 this way, and this way, and so he could sit in the middle of it, and over the door he had his oar from when he had rowed at Oxford. So that was our wonderful house, and last year when I had a chance to speak and I finished talking about how shoddy the construction was and how the stairs to the basement were mud and snakes came in, Jan McDonald raised her hand and said, "We bought that house." And I thought, oh no, I should have held my tongue. But it is now a very wonderful, cozy, well-made house. And last year, I had the pleasure of eating for the first time in the dining room because they had a real dining room table and chairs. And I wanted my family to be a regular family that did things like that, had furniture in the dining room and ate with a tablecloth and all that. Good luck on that one. I did not have that. I had really a bohemian family. As you will see, this is Will and me in 1943. We were 3 years old, and my family lived at the top of Friendly Avenue. Will's mother and Will and his younger brother, who was born in Iowa City almost the same day as Philip Guston's daughter was born. And there was a story going around that because Will's father was nowhere in evidence, that Philip Guston was the father of both of the children, which was just one of those myths. He wasn't. Will's mother was already pregnant when she moved there. And the other picture is Will and me naked at Stone City. We were a little long in the tooth to be naked, but we were. And my parents were not nudists in any way, but they also didn't make any effort to cover up. And we had to take baths outdoors because our house at Stone City had we had a lot of bathrooms, but we didn't have running water. And in that picture, my father has just handed me a bridle for a horse. And oddly enough, and Will has this on video that his mother took, I put the bridle on as though I were the horse, and Will sort of took the reins and drove me around the yard naked. Will always had a crew cut, because that's how what boys did at that time. And his father, who was in the military, had a crew cut, and I had that wispy flyaway blonde hair. And I once said to my mother, "I know how you tell boys from girls." And my mother said, "How?" And I said, "Boys have round heads." And, you know, it was the crew cut. So, so much for sex education. We never played doctor because why bother? I mean, we were naked playing in the creek a lot and so forth. Let's see. Do I have you reading a poem then?
If you like.
Yeah, go ahead. Read the Boy Next Door. Okay.
This is from the American Child, the first edition. It's sonnet 58. The boy next door owned toys she had never found, and best of all, a marvelous blue boat with wheels that rolled it over grass and ground. Yet in a pool of water it would float. All other toys moved in one element, truck on the land, kite on a length of string, but the blue boat was doubly different, less like a plaything than a living thing. One evening she left it on the walk, and it was smashed, her first enormous crime. He wept accusingly, unreconciled, until she touched him without any talk, with one warm hand, and was, for the first time, in act a woman, though in hand a child.
Will spent a lot of time at our house because my father was one of the few men who was around at the time. The others had been drafted. They were off in the military, and my father was not drafted because he had flat feet. This was not a case of the unknown podiatrist who managed to get our president out of the military. This was flat feet. You weren't supposed to have those. He was also teaching German at the university, and Will once said that when he grew up, he wanted to be a Homer like Paul Engle. He wanted to be a man who stayed home. So when I was 5 years old, my father published American Child, which was a sonnet sequence about me growing up and about his thoughts about what it was like to be a child. And the photograph of my profile is one he took of me in my playhouse. American Child had an unusual amount of attention paid to it, given that it was a book about a child. It's not a children's book at all. It's a father's perspective on childhood, and it was an interesting experience being the subject of this book. Life magazine, which I see two people who are old enough to have remembered Life magazine. My friends here in the front, and Connie also. But Life magazine sent a photographer who, of course, had to stay with us. There were no hotels around where we lived in the summer. And so these are pictures of me that he took to illustrate some of the poems, and I recognize exactly what I'm wearing in those various pictures. That nightgown, that pinafore with the violet print on it. So you'd think, oh, what fun for this child to be photographed by a professional, doing all these interesting things that she actually did. However, there's one poem in the book, which we're not going to read, in which a doll gets smashed in the head, and the child weeps and is distraught. And the photographer wanted a photograph in which I was not just standing in the window or pounding nails, but I had a lot of grief in my face. So he said, bring me one of your dolls and I'll smash the head with a hammer and take some pictures. I said, no. So he said, okay, we will go into Anamosa, 3 miles away, to the drugstore, and you pick out a doll. So I picked out a doll, one of those with the stiff pink dress and the cellophane over the box. And he said, you can play with it in the car on the way going back. So I did. I thought, oh, this is a really fancy doll. And then he said, now it's time for me to smash the head in. And I said, no, again. So we skipped that. We skipped the grief emotions in that. So when I learned to read and write, which was by the end of the first semester of first grade, my mother said, now it's time for you to write a book. You can both read and write. And she sat me down at her sewing machine table, and she had bought one of those black and white speckled copybooks. So I started writing, and I was telling Reed that I wrote so literally everything we had done. So the book has a really catchy title, Things We Did in 1947. And very, very literal. Reed, luckily, can also write fiction. He has several modes. I had one mode. My father had a lot of attention and success early on. This is a very famous picture of the New York Times front page of the book review of American Song. And that experience of being considered so successful and so full of promise, I think when you're really young can have a negative experience on people. But I think in my father's case, it was really energizing, and boy, did he have energy. So he, as director of the writer's workshop, he was always sitting on a desk. That's a very typical picture. I walked down from the University Elementary School, which was my school. I just had to walk down the hill and about a block to the workshop. So I did that every day after school and kind of hung out on his chair, his office chair, which would roll out. So I got to observe the workshop. I was young, but I was all eyes and ears. And it was most interesting listening to all these people reading and looking at them. He also had writers' conferences, and the gentleman in the checked African-American man in the checked jacket is Ralph Ellison, who wrote The Invisible Man and who came to Iowa as a guest speaker. But my father and I also had dinner with him at his apartment in Harlem, and afterwards he walked us out and stood with us till we got in a taxi, because he said, you need a black person here so you don't get mugged. Before we talk about the English department head, I wanted to say that one thing I overheard my father talking with my mother about many, many times was the dean at the university. And my father was constantly, seemingly arguing with the dean to maintain, to help fund, to allow the writer's workshop. It was very much of an uphill battle. And I had no idea what a dean was, but I pictured that he was the Wizard of Oz. I am Oz, the great and terrible. Who are you and what do you want? And it was a constant battle there. He had a different approach with the head of the English department, and this beautiful Tudor-style house in Iowa City belonged to Baldwin Maxwell, and my father would bring my mother and my sister and me to gatherings. There were not any other children there, but he had a Baldwin Maxwell was sort of a short, roundish man who wore three-piece suits, which was unusual in Iowa City, and he had a library, a kind of English library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and one of those wooden trolley ladders that goes along. And my sister and I were dressed by my mother in matching sister dresses. She sewed beautifully, and we were very well behaved because my mother said, as we were leaving the house, pretend you have lovely manners. And so we pretended. We sampled the little smoked oysters on crackers, blah, but we certainly had lovely manners. And so we were kind of there as persuaders. And eventually, my father did win over Baldwin Maxwell and even wrote a poem about him. But it always seemed as though, as the director of the Writers' Workshop and trying to grow it, that the university considered him sort of an oddball. But whatever. Here are some more pictures in the workshop, and these are people I recognize. Vance Burge sitting down, and Verlin Castle in the photo with my father, his arm sort of on the back of his chair. And eventually, Verlin Castle, who taught at Brown, wrote a lot of pulp fiction. At one point, when I was in graduate school at Harvard, my first graduate school, Verlin tried to seduce me. He wrote me a letter inviting me to come to Brown on the train and come to Providence. And on a weekend when his wife was away, and I had no interest whatsoever, I very politely declined. But when I think back on it, he was writing pulp fiction, and I could have been in a book called Dormitory Women or Up the Down Co-ed. So I blew it. That was my only chance. However, I was not tempted in the slightest. In the other photo, I recognized Don Justice. Yes, yeah, and Henri Coulette, who has the round glasses. I have a feeling I recognize the tall man in the hat, but I can't place him, but maybe somebody here can. No? On the right, in the khaki shirt, is Robert Measy, who I remember very well because he was in a famous fight between writers, drunken writers, in, what was the bar? Irene was the first name. Not the airliner, Kenny's Bar, and somebody's nose got broken. I don't know, his or, he looks more as though he would break someone's nose. And I knew all these writers because my father took me around with him. We had a very close relationship, and every time he said, "I'm going such and such," I said, "Can I go?" And he said, "Oh, of course." So I did. Let's see. This is a good time for you to read that poem about the Writers' Workshop.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. This is a poem by Don Colburn, written in 1989, published first in the Iowa Review in that year. In the workshop, after I read my poem aloud. All at once, everyone in the room says nothing. They continue doing this, and I begin to know it is not because they're dumb. Finally, the guy from the Bay Area who wears his chapbook on his sleeve says he likes the poem a lot, but can't really say why, and silence starts all over until someone says she only has a couple of teeny suggestions, such as taking out the first 3 stanzas, along with all modifiers except slippery and delicious in the remaining 4 lines. A guy who hasn't said a word in 3 days says he, too, likes the poem. Why it was written, he wonders why it was written, and since I don't know either, I don't even know, and I don't even know if I should, I'm grateful there's a rule I can't say anything now. Somebody, I think it's the shrink from Seattle, says the emotion is not earned, and I wonder when it is ever. The woman on my left, who just had a prose poem in green thumbs and geoducks, says the opening stanza is unbelievable, and vindication comes for a sweet moment until I realize she means unbelievable. But I have my defenders too, and the MFA from Iowa, the one who thinks the you is an I, and the they a we, and the then a now, wants to praise the way the essential nihilism of the poem's occasion serves to undermine the formality of its diction. Just like your comment, I say to myself. Another admires the Zen-like polarity of the final image, despite the mildly pathetic symbolism of sheep droppings, and he loves how the 3 cliches in the penultimate stanza are rescued by the brazen, self-exploiting risk. The teacher asks, what about the last line? And the guy with the chapbook volunteers, it suits the poem's unambitious purpose, though he has to admit it could have been worded somewhat differently.
That is so great. That's just such a wonderful. So I wanted to talk about a few of the writers that I remember very, very well. Robert Frost is reading. My father had invited him to come and read his poetry, and he, of course, ended up staying with us in our house at Stone City, and
Does everyone know who Stone City is?
what?
Does everyone know who Stone
No,
City is?
we haven't gotten to Stone City
But
yet.
you're mentioning it.
I know, I've mentioned it, but we haven't gotten there. We haven't quite gotten there yet. And I'm mindful of the time. I have a little clock here. I won't go on and on. But when Robert Frost stayed with us at Stone City, my father had found an old pinball machine in the ice house. The ice house was full of junk stuff, wonderful things. You could spend hours in there. But he had rigged it up in the front hall of our house so that you didn't have to put money in. You could just play it. And I remember, since my bedroom was quite near, I remember Robert Frost staying up way into the night playing pinball. And Flannery O'Connor, somebody I remember very well. I was always interested in the women in the workshop, and she sat there totally silently in a gray flannel skirt and a high-neck blouse, and she was tatting all the time. It's like crocheting, but with finer needles, and she was making this sort of lace edging to go on her camisoles, which she called vests, to go under the high-necked blouses. And as I think about it, she was probably tatting so she wouldn't have to make eye contact, because she was so incredibly shy in the beginning. So she was sitting there, not making eye contact, she was too shy to read her stories in the beginning. My father had to read them aloud. But there she was, plotting, thinking about these blood-curdling plots full of murder and men on the verge of dementia, and then before the story's over, they've gone over the edge into dementia. And complete contradistinction to her appearance. She did loosen up, and the second year, there she is in the coat in Amana. My father loved taking groups of writers to Amana to dinner at Zuber's Dugout restaurant, and it was owned by Connie Zuber Baugh's family. Connie, can you stand up or raise your hand since she's here? And it was a wonderful restaurant, served German food, served family style, and my father thought it was very good for all these writers to see real Americans, real Iowans. And Iowa was, at the time, a dry state, no alcohol. So you could not drink alcohol while going through Iowa on a train or flying over Iowa. But Connie's father made dandelion wine, which he served in amber-colored tumblers, so it looked like iced tea in case the place was ever raided, but it wasn't. And I tasted it once. It's sort of like alcoholic orange pop, kind of. They don't say pop anymore. But anyway, I do remember going to Amana many times, and we are actually going to Amana in a couple of days. One reason I think the workshop was so successful and people kept wanting to come and liked their time being there was the social aspect. And as I said, we had a lot of writers in our house. This is a party with a large number of writers at Stone City, which I'm getting to, and it was such a big house that you could have many people, and people could sometimes did sleep over on the couch. This is Stone City. We finally got there. And the picture on the left is the house as it was originally built by an Irish stonecutter who had a number of children and a lot of money from limestone quarries. And that little sort of gated thing is the south porch, which was glassed in. It was an orangerie that had orange trees and alligators. The way we got Stone City is that my mother's father got into the real estate business, and so he was supposed to sell this gigantic white elephant of a house, because by then it had no plumbing, it had no running water, it had a number of fancy bathrooms, but no running water, and no heat. And so he bought it to kind of kick off his real estate career. He bought it for $200. It came with 200 acres, a number of outbuildings made of limestone, the biggest barn in Iowa, which was on a quarry floor. It was a magical place for us to spend the summer. In the photo in the middle with my parents, my father having another try at smoking the pipe and looking cool, Marvin Cohn, who was an artist in Cedar Rapids and was part of the Grantwood Art Colony, and he and his wife were very good friends of ours. So you can see how we could have an awful lot of people in that house, downstairs and upstairs. It was marvelous to spend the summer there. Now, another reason I think my father did so well with the workshop is that he was, at heart, a social worker. And I picked this picture. This is not what you think of when you think of what a social worker looks like. You think of somebody that looks like me. And I was a social worker. But as he was reading through the piles and piles of mail he got every day, writers were submitting poems and short stories and talking about how they wanted to come to the writer's workshop. And he would write back and say he would accept them on the basis of their writing, but then he wrote back to try to figure out how they could get here financially, what they would do when they got to Iowa City, where they would live, how they would support themselves. A number of them were older and had wives and children, and this is what I mean about being a social worker. He assessed each person's fellowship, and he was very, very good at raising money, but he assessed the fellowship amount based on their needs, not on the quality of their writing necessarily, if they'd been accepted. So what do you need? Do you have children? Do you need help with finding a place to live? And in fact, in that Harris tweed jacket that he's wearing there, he eventually gave that jacket to a writer who was cold. So that's what I mean by being a social worker. Many of the writers who had families lived in these Quonset huts on the banks of the river, and two families could live in one of those because they had a door at each end. I remember taking many trips over with my father to the Quonset huts to visit families, to bring my baby crib, my tailor-taught stroller, all sorts of baby equipment, bouncing chair, and those things, we never had anything sitting around our house because they were always being lent out. And inside the Quonset hut, the walls were curved, so you couldn't hang anything very well. But I do remember families eating off Melmac, which had just been discovered, those certain kind of early plastic and modern colors of coral and chartreuse and aqua. It was really ugly. And he managed to get jobs as a night orderly in the psychiatric hospital for writers who had a new baby at home, so they would have a quiet place to write, and the patients were all heavily medicated, and so they just slept through. So really, you could go and sit there, and then you went home in the morning, and oh my goodness, you're so tired, you worked all night, so you got to take a nap. Another reason that things were so successful, I think, is there was a general feeling of optimism in the country. The war had ended, and I love this picture of my father, who was, in fact, until the end of his life, eternally optimistic. He always thought things were going to work out. And I want to read something very quickly that a writer, James B. Hall, wrote about the atmosphere for writers. Many of the writers were older. They had been in the military. They had just been released. They were on the GI Bill, so they could study whatever they wanted. And James Hall wrote about his fellow writers. So we could fly airplanes, navigate at sea, pack a parachute, repair your car, wear your house, address a Cedar Rapids ladies club, or handle explosives. And they were a very interesting group. And he said in another passage, there was a nice American optimism about the operation. Expansion was a way to prove worth and obtain more program money. I wanted Will to read a part of a poem, one stanza from the last part of American Child, which really expresses this.
I'm a little hesitant to read this because so much of it does not apply right now. Lucky the living child born in a land whose fault and lack are publicly admitted, where men affirm the ground on which they stand without fear that their lives have been committed, where men dare state their difference with the state and walk out in the daylight unafraid. No child is fed with artificial hate, nor puffed with flags, mass marching, and parade.
Yeah. That's
No
what
longer.
he genuinely felt. Do I have more time, Rachel? Can I keep 10 minutes? Okay. So my father seemed to know all writers at the time. This is Robert Frost and my mother in Cuba. E. Cummings in New York City, where I lived beginning when I was 16. Another story, but anyway, he and his wife, Marion Morehouse, were very, very kind to me, and I loved going down there to Patchen Place because I was a governess for one of the Rockefeller families, and they were so stiff, and I never quite caught on what the rules were, but I could go down there. And at one point, Cummings asked if he could paint my portrait, and I said, sure. So we went up to the third floor, and I'm my portrait is on the right. And I loved going there because I could listen to him talk about his life. And for some reason, he really wanted to talk about what he felt about things and his first wife and what her terrible experiences and so forth. And I always wondered why he had wanted to paint me. I was no artist model. And then I found later that 10 years before that, he had painted his daughter, Nancy, who was on the left, and she had not grown up with him. And she told him when he was painting her portrait that she was in love with him. And he said, "Didn't anybody tell you I'm your father?" And this was quite a surprise and shock to her. And Marion Morehouse, his wife, didn't let Nancy come around anymore. But I kept coming around. And the inscription in that book, a miscellany, which he gave me in 1960, at the time he was painting my portrait. I was 20. That book I don't have. It was sent off, not by me, to a secondhand store in Iowa City. And Jan McDonald, to whom I am deeply grateful for many things, ran over there the day they put the book and a number of our old family photos out and bought the photos. She did not buy the book, which was selling for $650, and I don't know who bought it. But in any case, she took a picture of the inscription. There were many strong connections between artists and writers in Iowa City at the time, and I gather that there still are. But this is Grant Wood, of course, who had the art colony at Stone City in that house and the art buildings. This is such a popular painting. It was on the phone book, if anyone's old enough to remember phone books. And Marvin Cohn, who drew a portrait of me and who painted a lot of haunting pictures of doors, one of which my family had. And Philip Guston, who was a friend, and this is a painting of Halloween children, one boy picking his nose that we had in our living room. Mary Holmes, who is Will's mother's sister, who was an artist and taught at the university. And the portrait is of my mother, which was in our house, 1218 Friendly Avenue. And the other painting, which was done later, is of Will holding the flute and his brother Jonathan holding the chicken, and the little boy with blonde hair, his younger brother, which that painting is in Will's house in Oakland now. And Mauricio Lasansky, who my father admired so much, some prints, and my father wrote a book in the 60s thanking people who had donated to the workshop, and it was heavily illustrated with Lasansky prints. So I've had my 10 minutes more.
Thank you very much for coming. This program has been recorded, so if you wanted to share it later, it's on the library channel. Thank you very much to Mary and Will and to Reed for presenting here today, and take some food with you when you leave. But real quick, does anyone have any questions that they had for Mary
Or comments?
Oh, okay, one in the back, yeah. Hang on, we have a microphone.
Jan and Steve are my neighbors around the corner, and my daughter owns the house next to the house you grew up in. Did Paul Olson live there at the time you were a child?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and which is your house? Is it on Ewell or the one?
My daughter lives in 1217 Ewell, right on the corner.
Right
the
on the
stone
corner.
one. And then we live in a Moffett up on Ginter Avenue, but it's just wood frame. But I do history of the neighborhood, so some of these names, are clicking. But I think it was providential that those two bought your former home.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, it couldn't have been better or more surprising to me. And we did know people who lived in all those different houses, and yeah.
And of course, the Gowans.
Uh-huh.
Have you seen his book that was written about a decade ago now? But it's kind of a coming-of-age book combines Moffat's and Richard DeGowan's experience. He was probably a little older than you, so.
Well, and I left Iowa City when I was 16.
Okay.
So I never lived there again.
And what year did you leave that Friendly Avenue house?
Well, in about 1956.
56,
Thank you.
okay.
Yes, in 1956, my parents, the house had gotten kind of even more run down with our living in it, and they bought a house at 724 Bayard Street, which had an interesting history as well, but I'm not going to, yeah. So I went back. I always went back to Iowa City to visit, but I never lived there again.
I wondered real quick, I know we're late, but could you talk a little bit about the trampoline and your family?
Oh, my mother's younger brother, George Nissen, invented the trampoline, and he liked to jump on beds, and he liked springy things, and he was a tumbler. He was actually in the circus. And he wanted to get the patent on the trampoline. He had built one out of pipes and steel coils and webbing. And to get the patent, you had to make a tiny little model of whatever it was you were going to get the patent on. So he made the little model and took the bus to Washington, D.C., and got the patent on it, and came back and opened a trampoline factory in Cedar Rapids. But while he was being a tumbler, he was in Europe in a circus act, and there was a young Dutch couple who were tightrope walkers without a net, and the husband fell and was killed. And my Uncle George was very kind-hearted and took charge of the beautiful new widow and put her on the plane to go back to Holland, but didn't get off the plane and ended up marrying her, bringing her back to Cedar Rapids. And she was a tumbler and part of the trampoline act. He once had a competition with a kangaroo and on a trampoline, and sort of hokey, but he actually could go higher. The kangaroo could just jump, but Uncle George had the technique, so we always had trampolines around. And what?
Each year?
Yes, each year he would put a trampoline, the newest model of a trampoline, on the back of his newest model Cadillac with a trampoline holder, like a bicycle holder, and bring us a new trampoline. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a question?
Yes, Iowa has such a rich history of railroads. One picture you showed a railroad bridge, and it said Stone City on the sun.
Right. There was a train that went between Cedar Rapids and Greeley, and it went in from Cedar Rapids in the morning and back out in the late afternoon, and it brought mail and groceries and so forth. And Will's grandmother would make Maryland fried chicken. They lived in Greeley, and she would put it in a pan with wax paper over it and tell the conductor, now, when you get through Anamosa, lift the wax paper a little to let the steam out. And then my father and I would drive down to the railroad station, which was also the general store and the telegraph and Stone City, and pick up the fried chicken. But I could also take the train into Anamosa to the house of the newspaper editor to practice the piano. So yes, there was definitely a train going back and forth.
And that went through Stone City?
Well, you had to go through Stone City. I mean, it was a very short line from Cedar Rapids to Greeley. I don't know how many miles that is, but not very many. It was the mail train.
And was there a station in Stone City?
Well, there was this building. It's in that Grant Wood painting. But anyway, there's a rectangular stone building right by one end of the bridge, and it's the railroad bridge, and it's right by where my father was standing, and it was the general store, the telegraph, the post office, and the train station. And so Clayton Dearborn, who did all those things, could fish during the day, and it was also the gas station. If you took gas, you were just supposed to leave a note and saying how much you'd taken. And he would sit out there because trains, it was safe to sit on the end of the bridge because there was a train coming one way and a train going the other way.
That was it.
And that was it. That was it. So once a freight train went through, and we were filming a Voice of America, Small Town USA episode, and I was in it, and I'm easily identified because I look exactly like all the other girls in the video, had the same ponytail, the same skirts, but a freight train came through, and the person doing the filming said, "Don't look at the freight train." And so everybody turned to look at the freight train, which was so novel, had to be reshot.
Last question.
You spoke of early influences on your father, and I'm not sure of the time frame. It was when he was in high school. I already have a relationship with Jane Sigler.
Yes.
And so were you able to know him during his lifetime?
You know, this is another one of those people who I remember the name so clearly. And yes, of course, but I think I was born in 1940, so I think that was
I don't know when he passed on.
right. And I don't know either. And I told Rachel that the two of you have completely upstaged me because I am used to being the oldest person in the room, and not tonight. I'll deal with it, but still.
We're only 85.
And I'm older than he is, 2 months. But that is such a familiar name, and yet I don't know how to fit him in. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting us again. Yeah, what fun.